An aid distribution point set up by Americans in Gaza has descended into chaos, with footage showing a stampede of people desperately scrambling to reach food as mercenaries fire on crowds. The drop point was set up by a controversial company called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, backed by the US and Israel as a replacement to UNRWA and other humanitarian groups operating in Gaza. Shortly after setting up in Rafah and forcing Palestinians to queue in tightly packed fences, reports say the contractors quickly abandoned their post and began firing into the air following a rush from the crowd. In a statement released shortly before by GHF, the company says it was overwhelmed by the crowds and decided to withdraw to allow people to, quote, take aid safely and dissipate in order to avoid casualties. But Gaza's media office says Israeli forces then fired into the crowd, resulting in a number of injuries. Now, since early March, Israel has denied the entry of all aid into Gaza, including food, clean water, and medicine, leaving more than 2 million Palestinians on the brink of starvation. Last week, the government began letting in a trickle of aid, which humanitarian groups described as grossly insufficient to address Gaza's deepening crisis. And we'll be playing you part of our interview with UNRWA Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini later in the show.
Hundreds of Israeli settlers stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque and its surrounding areas in Jerusalem on Monday to mark the so-called Jerusalem Day. Starting late Monday morning, groups of young Israeli men roamed through the city, targeting locals with harassment and violence. They were reported to have spat at women wearing hijabs, looted cafes, vandalized a bookshop, and forcibly entered Palestinian homes. Thousands of Israelis also gathered at the Western Wall to perform prayers on a day designed to celebrate the Israeli occupation of East Jerusalem after the 1967 war. Far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir was amongst over 2,000 Israeli settlers who marched towards the Al-Aqsa compound. They were filmed, videoed, waving Israeli flags and chanting "Death to Arabs."
And finally, 800 British lawyers have signed a letter demanding the British government sanction Israel in line with its own legal requirements. The legal professionals, which included former Supreme Court justices, academics, and retired senior judges, have urged the UK to uphold its international legal responsibilities by imposing sanctions on the Israeli government and its officials. They've also called for the UK to push for the revoking of Israel's UN membership. Last week, the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy announced the suspension of free trade negotiations with Israel.
I'm announcing that we have suspended negotiations with this Israeli government on a new free trade agreement. We will be reviewing cooperation with them under the 2030 bilateral roadmap. The Netanyahu's government's actions have made this necessary. Madam Deputy Speaker, today, my honourable friend, the Minister for the Middle East, is summoning the Israeli ambassador to the Foreign Office to convey this message.
But just days after the speech, the UK's trade envoy to Israel, Lord Ian Austin, was in Tel Aviv, celebrating the partnership between the two countries. In an op-ed published last week titled, quote, "We'd be foolish to sever our trade links," Lord Austin said trade with Israel was in the national interest and that the government's decision to pause negotiations would not change this.